Chris Singleton, former professional baseball player, when he's with his son, who also plays baseball, his son's about 10, 12 years old. They have a system. If the son puts his cap on facing forward, they're good to talk about the game. And they can say, hey, let's break down the plays. Let's see how everything went. Let's talk about it. Emotionally, I'm okay having those conversations. But if his son turns the hat backwards, then, you know what, Dad, I don't want to talk about it. That was a horrible game. Let's just go get some ice cream and just relax and not worry about this so much. They have a non-verbal system they've created, so his son doesn't have to feel bad opening up to him, because one of the worst things we can do as dads is the drive home afterwards can really harm our relationship with our children.
So let me ask you this about your podcast, because I've been really enjoying this podcast. I've been listening to you guys. Yesterday, we were driving from Massachusetts. We were there for a hockey tournament, and I listened to a few episodes in a row. And it's awesome. I actually enjoyed it a lot, quite a lot. So, and my background is quite different than yours, because you had a grandfather you mentioned who was a fiduciary, so gave you kind of this financial background, which to me is something that I lacked. Like, to my shame, I'm ashamed to admit, but I only learned about compound interest in my early 30s, which is kind of infuriating, because really this is like one of the most important principles to teach kids from an early age, because compound interest is all about timing.
Even
about
Einstein
time.
talked about it.
Yeah, he said it's the eighth wonder of the world. And when I
Yeah.
discovered it, I'm like, how did I not know this? I'm so ashamed and embarrassed. But when it comes to kids, so I'm teaching my son, and I'm kind of trying to figure out how do I teach him compound interest, because they don't get the notion of 40-year plans yet. He's 9.
Yeah. All
so
they
you
know
have
is what's right in front of them.
So you also have a young son, right? How old is Lucas today?
He's 4. He just had a birthday.
He's 4. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
how do you plan to teach your son? I'm trying to learn from people that have been there before me, because I'm sure you're already thinking about this, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on like teaching him financial literacy from an early age, especially like complex things that take time to understand, like compound interest?
So here's what my grandfather did for me, and I think this makes a lot of sense. He gave me some stock, and he gave me some financial resources that would directly affect me. So it wasn't enough to like set me up for life or anything, but it was enough to make it interesting to where it mattered to me. And so because he was able to give me those financial tools, it made it interesting to me, right? If it's just paper and off in the clouds, it's very hard to find it exciting. But because it was mine, and I realized that, okay, this is something that I could potentially have for the rest of my life, and then it could affect my family later on, it really mattered. So in addition to giving me some of these stocks and bonds, he also talked about the importance of them and what it meant and what I could do with it personally, and then what he did it. So he kind of turned it into a game. And so from a young age, I found finance very interesting, and I did everything I could to learn about it because he showed me, all right, this is what this is. And then if you have it, you can turn it into something else. And I realized quickly that it was an incredible tool, and that it can make your life easier if you have the financial resources. It can also give you more access to things that you might want. And so I
Very
think
good. Yeah.
because he made it real, I think that's what really did it.
I was trying to do that too. So when my son made his first money, he started being an entrepreneur when he was 6, right? So
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
we are lifelong entrepreneurs ourselves, and we believe that it's probably the best way to teach kids, because, well, what do we want out of kids, right? We want to raise resilient kids, and entrepreneurship is always difficult. It's always challenging.
Yeah.
And we know that difficulty and adversity is how you actually form, hard characters.
Yeah.
And entrepreneurship is that. Plus all the skills that come with it. So he made his first money, and I convinced him. I kind of had a little talk with him. He wanted to buy something, and I told him that if you keep buying something, you're going to be selling stuff for the rest of your life. So we invested into stocks, right? I opened him a Webull account. The mistake I made is that I didn't let him play with his money. We just invested it. He didn't get to feel it,
Oh,
like to
yeah.
spend it. So
Yeah.
we corrected it now later. He kept making money. He's got his business. He's 9. He's making money. And now I don't no longer like influence whatever you want to buy. It's your money,
Yeah.
So he even got himself I gave him my old wallet, so he's carrying cash with him all the time.
That's
so he can
huge.
buy
Yeah.
stuff.
And that's one of the consequences of the digital economy is kids need to feel coins. They need to feel dollars for it to feel real. So when my grandfather bought me stock, he got me the physical certificates. I don't even think they do that anymore, but I'm old enough to where they would actually give you a physical printout. So this was Microsoft stock, and it said, Bill Gates is the CEO. It had the gold foil around it, all that kind of stuff. And it really felt real. Okay, this is one share of stock. I own a piece of this company. And then I would look at Microsoft and what they were doing. And I would say, oh, my computer uses Microsoft. So this is a really cool stock. I want to invest in more of it, right? But if it hadn't been something I could touch, if it was just an app on my phone, you're right. I don't think it's as easy to get that physical connection to it. So yeah, I
Well,
think we should definitely give our kids
here,
coins. We should play with them, all that. That's huge. Play Monopoly, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
It
we
makes a
play
lot more
Monopoly.
sense.
We play
Yeah, nice.
Monopoly.
It's
And
good.
so when it comes to paper certificates, Disney used to issue you a paper certificate. You can request it. There was like a whole process, cost $50. They've canceled it since, but online, what we did, we still found that certificate, and my wife just used Photoshop to put my son's name in it and printed it out and gave it to him.
Perfect.
So
Very
he had
smart.
a paper certificate from Disney because he bought Disney. Not a good investment, by the way. He
Yeah,
lost
not
money on
recently.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not recently.
he lost money with Disney. But
Yeah.
that's the game. He's learning, he's losing, he's winning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
lately I've been trying to teach him, the S&P index fund game
Yeah.
and how basically, but that's where I come across the problem of time. Because I try to explain to him that long term, you can't beat the market. There's only like 3, 4 guys in the world that beat the market and they won't take your money, right? Ray
Yeah.
Dalios of the world.
Mhm.
So the best way to do is like an index fund. And good luck explaining to a 9-year-old what an index fund is.
It's complicated. Good luck explaining to a 30-year-old. Most people, it's funny, I'll talk to people at work and they have retirement accounts and they have no idea what's in them. And I'll take a look and say, you have a 1.5% annual fee on this mutual fund that they put you in. That's a lot of money. Maybe switch to an ETF. And they say, what's an ETF? And I say, it's the same thing as the mutual fund you have, but 10 times less the cost. So most adults don't understand it either. So if you're able to set your son up with that in an early age, he's going to have a huge advantage.
Well, now that you mentioned ETFs, let's talk about the Bitcoin ETF, right? They just launched, and
Yeah, that's exciting, isn't it?
how that's going to impact Bitcoin. What is your take on that? What do you think how is it going to impact Bitcoin? Is it going to take control away from the decentralized Bitcoin platform, or is it going to bring more money into it? What do you think?
So let's talk about the positive and negatives. Definitely. There is the negative aspect that there's only 21 million Bitcoin, right? But if you rehypothecate, which means if the options and the money around the Bitcoin is worth more than the Bitcoin itself, then it's not really limited. And so we do run the risk of having 21 million limited Bitcoin, but 21 billion rehypothecated options around Bitcoin, and then it's all meaningless. So that is definitely a concern. Just like the American economy produces what $20 trillion a year, but the all of the money around it is in the quadrillions, right? When you consider all the loans and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't have a crystal ball by any means, but that is definitely a concern, that the whole idea of Bitcoin is that it's limited and then you take that away. So that may happen. Now, on the positive end, if you look at what happened with gold after the first ETF came out, it was a slow burn. The first couple of years, it kind of stayed the same. And then as the inflows started piling in, the value accrued greatly. And so I would expect Bitcoin to have a similar effect. I don't think it's going to be this year or next year, but I think by 2025, 2026, almost everyone will have some exposure to Bitcoin in their retirement accounts. And when you're talking about the entire world having a little bit of Bitcoin, the value is going to explode. So long term, again, just like we talked about, I think it's a great investment to have some money in. As far as what it's going to do in the next couple of years, who knows? If the economy turns down, it could drop back down to $10,000, $20,000 a coin. I have no idea. If that happened, I would definitely buy some more.
Yeah,
But as far as, oh, go ahead.
I think the long-term strategy with anything is the right strategy in terms of investments. Like you got to just invest and hold. Look at Warren Buffett, like the greatest investor of our times, right? He always just buys long-term. The guy never trades anything.
Yeah,
Like they go in on something and they hold it forever. They
yeah.
just do the due diligence before they buy it. So I'm bullish on Bitcoin as well as you are. And I think it's interesting what's happening with the ETFs right now and AI in general. So let's talk a little bit about AI,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
Because you're into AI as much as I am. I believe that AI will revolutionize and disrupt pretty much every single industry available. Like even look at doctors today. You are anesthesiologist, so you're kind of hands-on doctor, right? So you can't really replace you with AI. But as far as diagnoses and other things, look at Google's Palm 2 that came out, which can literally just like you can take the blood analysis, feed it into Palm 2, and it'll give you better diagnosis than any doctor. Look at lawyers. I have friends that run a law firm. They told me they actually laid off some of their entry level lawyers. They used to do research and will no longer hire anybody else because AI does way better research than any human can. And a lot of legal work is research and document creation. Like very few
Yeah.
lawyers actually like go to court and argue cases. Most of them, they just do work behind the computer,
It's behind the
So
scenes. Yeah.
yeah, so AI is going to disrupt all of that. And I think when it comes to our children, for instance, like my podcast is all about raising game changers. And it started with the book by Stephen Kotler, The Rise of the Superhumans. And when I'm learning about like Navy SEALs and flow states, and I'm like, we need to teach that to kids from an early age. This is unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
But then I'm also thinking when it comes to AI, if we don't teach them from an early age, then they're behind because other countries do. Like in China today, they start AI classes from 7 years old, right? So right away they dive into AI. So what is your take on AI disruption and education? I'm
There's
just
so much
curious.
here. Yeah, this is such a great topic. So first of all, I am an anesthesiologist assistant. It's a physician assistant degree. It's a 2-year master's. So
Okay.
I recommend it to everybody. It's a wonderful job. I get to intubate, do everything that a doctor does, but I didn't have to go to med school and spend the 10 years and all that on it. So I was able to jump in, got my undergraduate degree. It's competitive. It's hard to get into, but if you can, it's a 2.5-year master's degree. And then, like I said, you're doing everything an anesthesiologist is doing. So highly recommend the career. It's pays well. It's very satisfying. You're able to help patients all the time. So if that's something anyone's interested in, feel free to ask me questions about it because it's a fantastic career. Um, as far as disruptions, someone actually invented an automatic anesthesia dispensing bot a couple of years ago. It doesn't work very well, but in theory, if they improved that, even anesthesia could get disrupted. Now, as far as placing tubes and lines and all that, that's a lot harder. But as far as the math is complicated, but for an AI, it's not. So it would not shock me if in 20 years, even hands-on medicine like anesthesia were disrupted to some extent. And you're exactly right. Lawyers, doctors, education in particular are ripe for disruption. The system we have now is incredibly inefficient. And there are very strong unions. You have nursing unions, you have education unions that are doing everything that they can to protect those jobs. But at some point, it won't matter. Disruption is so powerful that, I'm looking at one in particular is called Synthesis School. Really exciting stuff. They all worked at SpaceX and all had kids, and they created a school specifically. These rocket scientists essentially created this school, and then they are bringing it to the masses now. So it's all AI and human tutors that are working together to give kids the tools, kind of like Chinese kids at age 7, starting with the stuff, learning about AI. This is the same kind of thing, and I think these kinds of things are going to become more and more popular as parents realize if I just take my kids and send them to school and don't teach them anything beyond that, they might not succeed. So when you and I were going to school, my mom was amazing. She taught me a lot outside of the school. But in theory, if she had just sent me to school back in 1990 and I learned as well as I could and got the degree and all that, I could be very successful, right? That was all I needed tools wise. Now, I firmly believe that my son is 4 years old. If I just send him to a regular school and don't do anything beyond that to teach him, I don't think he's going to be successful. I don't think he'll have the tools he needs to succeed in the modern world. So as dads, it is so important that we do what you're doing and we teach our kids everything we can to get ready for this modern world.
Well,
And
I'll talk to you about schooling in a second because your podcast interview with Matt Bordeaux was mind blowing. I love this guy.
isn't he
You know,
great?
he
Yeah.
is phenomenal. I've been listening to him for quite some time and I've learned a lot. And I've actually pulled my young kids from school already. I'm unschooling, even though my son used to go to one of the best private schools in the United States, bases in Upper West Side, New York.
Mhm.
And Elon, when he started, what you call synthesis school, that actually started as a school he called Ad Astra to the
Yes.
stars.
So you know it. Okay, great.
Oh
Yep.
yeah, it blew my mind because he started in 2014, the year my son was born, and I learned about it a few years later. I'm like, well, if this guy is actually doing this, and his kids used to go to probably the best school in the United States. It was called the Minimum School for Gifted and Talented in Bel Air, Los Angeles. He
Mhm.
pulled them out there. And what surprised me the most is that in the United States, nobody ever asked them a question about education. You know what they did though? In China.
Sure.
So how would you educate your 5 boys?
Actually, I created a little school.
If you want to talk, if you want to listen to Elon talk about education, you can only find it on Chinese platforms where they interview him, but nobody in the United States does, which was again to me like, why wouldn't you Out of all the podcasts he does, nobody talks to him about Erastra. In China, that's the first thing they talked about him. Not first, but one of the topics they brought up is talk to us about Erastra. Why did you start school for your own kids outside of they were going to minimum school for gifted and talented in Bel Air? And his explanation was actually quite interesting. He was talking about what he didn't allude to what Matt talked about, how the Prussian model was actually created in order to create obedience, not really educate. But he went from a different approach, saying that the modern education system will not prepare our kids for the future at all, because he comes from first principles thinking all the time. And his first principles thinking all about, well, how do I prepare him for that? And when he analyzed the approach given the science today, he said that the approach is counterproductive. It is not beneficial to what's going to be required of them in the future. And when they asked him, what do you think is going to be required in the future? His answer was constant adaptation, right? Because the future is going to be changing rapidly all the time. And the way the school is designed today, it actually makes you like learn this one thing and not really adapt with the times. And you're going to be required to adapt fast all the time, nonstop. So first and foremost, we need to give kids the tools to be able to learn by doing and adapting while learning. You know, so this is why he started at Astra. So that's when the first seed in my mind happened. Like, what am I doing? Maybe I shouldn't be sending him to school. And then when I did the research, and I remember Matt mentioned the guy named John Taylor Gatto on your podcast. I have his books. And when I read his books, that's when we decided with my wife, okay, we can't do this to our kid. This is not what we want our child to become, because the whole system was designed, and it's very successful at its design. It's doing very well at creating consumers and employees. And this is not what I want my kid to be. I do not want to create a consumer and employee. I want to create a free thinker. And that leads me to my next question to you. So you've had this amazing guest on your pod, man. So what are some of your biggest takeaways from that? You guys run an amazing podcast. I couldn't recommend it highly enough. I'm definitely going to be dropping a link and description to your podcast. Everybody should be listening to the Present Fathers podcast. You guys had some amazing guests. So talk to me some of your things you've learned, because I'm doing this podcast. I'm learning a lot from guests like you and other guests. So what are your biggest takeaways from the guests you've had? You had some amazing guests on.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And I feel so blessed to be able to speak with these incredible men and women. I mean, I'm learning from the best of the best. And I know I've leveled up, having these conversations with them. And what I look for is the similarities. We've had about 50 different guests on the podcast. And if 35 of them are saying something similar, that to me says, all right, these incredible fathers all agree on these key elements. Those are areas that I really want to hone in on. And there's a couple of them. One big one is a small thing is bedtime. I've heard over and over from these incredible fathers. We ask what's most important, where do you learn the most, where do you have the best experiences? And I was expecting, oh, we took them to this amazing experience and we had this great thing together. It's never that. It's never the big moments. It's the small moments together where we really build those connections. And over, whether it's with their boys or their girls, these fathers are telling me that at bedtime, their children are a little bit sleepy, they're a little more relaxed, which means they're receptive to new knowledge and new ideas. And so as a dad, we only have so many years to impart those ideas to our kids. And that moment there, that half an hour that we have where they really are listening and they're relaxed and we can tell stories, those are the moments where our children really, really learn from us. And I'm seeing that with my son. He's all over the place all day. We're running around, we're wrestling, we're having fun together, but there's not that much direct learning going on, especially from books. And then around 7:30, we've had bath time. We go in and we have that half an hour together, and it's magic hour where he just really learns and absorbs all this information. And that is so important to take that time and take those opportunities. And so the dads that I talk to, they know how to capitalize on opportunities. As entrepreneurs, as businessmen, they know, okay, I may only have a few big moments in my life where I meet this great person or where I have this chance to build something. And it's the same with our kids. There's these really special moments that we have with them that we have to capitalize on. And if I'm not present, if I get a notification from Twitter that, something big is happening and I take that away from my son and I'm focused on that instead, I've really missed a big opportunity for connection and for teaching. And so one of my big goals for this year is to not allow myself to miss those opportunities. I want to be
great,
present.
man.
Yeah. And I learned that from my guests and from these wonderful men who have had these conversations. And I hear it over and over. Bedtime is where you really connect with your kids and you have this chance to, to teach them. So that's one of the biggest takeaways from my guests.
It's great
for
that you
sure.
guys are doing this podcast, because I wish that podcast was out when my son was born. It wasn't. I missed the first few years of my son's upbringing because I was workaholic. I was in my office 70 to 80 hours a week, thinking that I'm doing the right thing for the family by being the provider, which is, it's counterintuitive, but it's not. You should be with your kids a lot more. With my daughter now, I spend way more time. She's only 4 now. And I see the difference that my connection with her, my bond with her is so much more closer than with my son, because I wasn't there the first few years with him every day, putting him to bed, taking him to places. I was working, thinking my job as a provider is to provide. My wife is the raiser of the son, right? That was so not true. And it's one of those things that I think the society as a whole kind of like misguides us into thinking like, okay, it's school, it's college, it's job, that's the path, right? And we've had that shift away from in-home parenting. So let me ask you this. So now that you've interviewed Matt Bordeaux and your son is 4, he's about to be like 5, 6, and school year is, here it comes, and you also have to be at work. What are your plans? What are you thinking?
There's so much going on there. I think that our school system can teach our kids a lot. And so I'm not quite ready to pull them out of school like you did. I think homeschooling and teaching your children yourself is probably the ideal. I think there's a lot to be said for that. And the numbers are exploding, right? There were 50,000 American kids homeschooling 10 years ago, and now there's 5 million. I mean, the number of parents who are opting out and who are doing it themselves are just really, the numbers are staggering.
I think that number might shift a little backwards soon, only because the micro school explosion, like Matt Bordeaux is launching 100 schools with Tim Kennedy in, he said, September of 2024. And I'll be honest with you, if there was a school like that next to me, my unschooling career would be over. I would send him to that school, because what they do, like, they're modeling Acton Academy. He actually runs 2 Acton Academies in California, Matt. And what Acton does, I actually interviewed one guy also on my pod that's launching one in Cincinnati. They went from one location in Austin, Texas, to 300 plus now, to over 1,000 in a few years. They had over 18,000 applicants that want to do Actons. And what Acton does, there's no separation by grades. There's no separation by age. It's all interest-based learning. So whatever your kid is into is what they empower. And entrepreneurship is basically the path, right? They teach the Heroes 2 journey to every single child. They try to uncover a child's passion in every child, and then nurture that passion. And I think Naval Ravikant said it best when it comes to anybody's passion, because like, what is a passion, right? And he defined it. I think the best definition I ever heard is like, what feels like play to you, but work to others.
You want to find what feels like play to you, but looks like work to others.
Oh, I like that.
Such a good definition of passion.
Yeah.
Right.
So a lot of people would think these conversations would be exhausting. They wouldn't want a podcast, but you and I love it. And so it's not work for us. It's joy.
I am loving these conversations, man. I love talking to people. I like meeting new people. And these days, this medium empowered me to meet a guy like you. And I have other amazing podcasts that I already did, and I have others scheduled, including Matt's coming on soon. Yeah, and like, this is amazing what we're doing now. Like, I'm loving this, and I'm making new friends now through podcast medium, by being a guest, by interviewing people. It's phenomenal. And like, YouTube kicked me out, right? They just closed our channel with no explanation. And thank God for Elon. Like, I don't know where we would have been without this dude.
Total game changer. Yeah. So, but I want to answer your question you asked previously about my son. It will be a work in progress. I want to give him a couple years and see how he does with us really being present and teaching him a lot extra on top of what he's learning at school. My wife and I both work, and we don't really have the option of giving him what he deserves, with full-time homeschooling, which is why we will send him to school. He'll learn from his grandfather is rebuilding a 1940s Jeep, an old CJ. And so he's already learning. It's amazing. Yeah. Mechanics. And so he's got these wonderful people in his life that'll help teach him. So my thought initially is that we will add on to the school system. And if it's clear that he's not thriving, he's not doing well with it. I did really well with the traditional school system. I was a rebel. I enjoyed the times that I knew I was supposed to do one thing and I did something else. And it taught me how to play the game and a lot of good things about it. So if he can come at it from a place like I did, where it was a joyful process, then we'll continue to keep him in school. But if it's clear that a psychologist comes and says he has ADD, we need to put him on medication or something like that, I know very clearly that's not the problem. That the
Then it's
problem
just
is
bullshit.
the system and not my son. It's total BS. It's so frustrating because the rates of ADD, I think, are 5 times higher for boys than for girls, right? The number of boys that are on these very serious psychological medications are much higher than they should be, right? There are definitely some children out there who have severe attention problems, and the medications probably do help them, but I bet it's 10 times less than the rates we're seeing. And so if a psychologist were to come to us and say your child needs this intense psychological medication, I would kindly thank them for the time and then take them running as far away as I could, because
Do you ever
we're
listen
not
to
doing that.
Joe Rogan?
I do, yeah.
There was this dude on Joe Rogan's recently. His name is Gary Brecka. I couldn't recommend this podcast enough. I sent it to all my friends. I made my parents watch this podcast, and I translated to them what they don't understand, because they're from former Soviet Union. Their English is not that good. Not as good on that level, because he used a lot of medical terminology in there.
Sure.
So there's, in the very beginning of the podcast, like in the first 30 minutes, he breaks down what ADHD actually is, what causes it. And it's a mind-blowing explanation. I'm not going to butcher it right now, so I'm not going to do it, but I highly recommend you to actually watch that. You, as a medical professional, will have a lot of fun with that podcast.
Yeah.
And he basically attributes it to nutrition. He basically attributes the entire made up diagnosis to malnutrition, because what's happening in our country is very unfortunate, that the big pharma and the big food industry are owned by the same 3 giants. Like we're talking about BlackRock, StateStreet, and Vanguard. And it's basically, in business, there's a front end and there's a back end to everything. So what the food industry is doing is it's front end for a back end business model. They're basically poisoning us so that the healthcare industry has clients for life. And if you look at Western medicine as well, we're not really in the cure business. We're in the treatment business. We're not really curing diseases. And we now know, like, for instance, I discovered autophagy when COVID hit, right? We now know this guy who came up with autophagy is a Japanese doctor, got a Nobel Prize for it. There is a website, I think it's beatcancerwithchris.com. This dude, Chris, he's led thousands of people to cure cancer through autophagy, basically through starvation, because our body has this ability to recycle cells, right? And it's your healthy cells basically eating unhealthy cells. So he figured out a way to actually have cancer cells be eaten by your healthy cells through autophagy. And you're never going to hear that from a doctor, because it's not an approved science, even though there's a Nobel laureate that discovered autophagy. And now guys like Dr. Peter Attia, that I've listened to a lot, talk about it all the time, how they keep curing diseases. There's another doctor from Long Island. They have it's called something North something clinic, where they keep people up to 40 days on IV through fast, and they get rid of all kinds of diseases for good, forever.
It's amazing. And I was taught through all my nutrition classes, never be hungry, eat 6 to 7 small meals a day, because hunger is the enemy. And then it teaches you to emotionally be connected with that. And you have some hunger, which is literally just your body telling you your stomach is empty. It's not painful. There's nothing wrong with it. You don't need to panic. But I do a little bit. When I get hungry, I think, oh, I need to eat something, right? It's just a natural inclination. We all have that. We need to go the opposite direction and recognize that, yes, hunger is your friend. It lets you know that you are in a state where you are able to burn body fat, where you are able to kill cancer, all these kinds of things. And so shifting that mindset is going to be very hard, but it's so wonderful seeing people like, Dr. Peter Attia talking about the huge benefits of autophagy. It's a game changer. But
I remember what you talked about. I remember us being like, I used to take snacks with me to work, because I had to like eat every 2-3 hours, because that's what I thought was required. I would have like apple and nuts, and I would like feed myself every 2-3 hours. And now it's like, that was totally wrong. It was so wrong.
And temperature is the same way. One of the worst things we can do is to be in a comfortable, climate-controlled environment 24/7. If you're indoors and you're constantly at 70 degrees, your body, it's not very good for us. We really need to be in different temperatures, which is why things like cold plunging and saunas are so good for us, because brief exposure to extreme temperature also leads to autophagy and all these beneficial cancer fighting and anti-aging experiences. So the comfort in so many ways really is the enemy. And we're learning that more and more, that exercise is uncomfortable and it's great for us. Not eating for a while is uncomfortable and it's great for us. Being in a cold or a hot environment is a little bit uncomfortable and it's great for us. And it's the same for our kids. We have to be able to get our kids in uncomfortable situations and have them be okay with it. There's a great special on Netflix called Babies that came out a couple of years ago. And it talks about the changes that happen to the male and female brain when we have a child. So after a woman has her first baby, the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, triples in size, right? So if she's a 20-year-old woman and she has a baby, when she's 80, her 60-year-old child, she's still going to be just as fearful and afraid for that child and making sure that they're doing okay. The male brain, when we know we're going to have a baby, the cuddle hormones, oxytocin surges. So if you found yourself crying at commercials when you first had your baby, that's totally normal. We go through this phase as men where we're very cuddly and very loving, but the fear center does not change at all. Our amygdala stays the same size. And I really think that that's nature asking for the father to allow the child to take some risks and learn and maybe scrape their shins a little bit and then, be okay. And then the mom is there to make sure the dad doesn't go too far, make sure the kid does okay. So it's this two-pronged process where the dad I see this all the time. I'll take my son out with just us and we'll play on the playground and we play rough. He might scrape his knee. He's jumping off of things. I'm helping him. He's learning all these things. And then when my wife, his mom, comes, she's horrified. She says, Dustin, you can't let him do that. That's crazy. And I tell her, he's okay. This is how we learn. And so we really do have to teach our kids to be uncomfortable and allow them to break through barriers without pushing too hard. Obviously, as dads, we have to be careful. Our children are young. Don't let them get seriously hurt. But
no, I'll tell you, they actually need to get hurt. They need to learn that it's okay. I had an amazing experience with a friend of mine. Both him and his wife are professional athletes in the past. So their son is very athletic too. Him and my son used to play hockey together. We were at their house in Massachusetts one time, and his son falls down and he cuts himself really bad, the knee, and the blood is gushing. And my initial reaction was to jump up and go and help Anders. And Niels, his father, just grabbed me by the shoulder and goes, sit down. And I'm like, all right. I sit down. He's like, Zach, don't overreact. How you react is how he reacts.
Mm-hmm.
And it just blew my mind. And he literally, this is what happened next. He looks at him and goes, Anders, that looks pretty bad. And Anders looks at it and he's so calm, Dad. Like, that looks pretty bad. Meanwhile, the blood is gushing. And he's like, we might get this stitched up. And then the amazing thing happened. He just got up, walked over, took some bandage, wrapped it up. And then his wife came over and they stitched it up themselves. They didn't go to the hospital. Right. But his reaction was so calm. And Anders, my reaction would be not panicky, but like, oh my God, let me get to, blah, 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 blah. And then that was how the kid would react. Right. He was so calm and composed. And the son was looking at it like, yeah, that was pretty bad, but it doesn't hurt because he's in a state of shock right now. So it's not really painful yet. It's just a visual that's really disturbing.
Yeah.
So
that's another thing I learned over and over from our guests is we probably, Dan Go, I think, was the first one to say it, but we probably had 10 or 15 different dads that all say, you don't teach your kids with what you say, you teach them by doing and by showing, right? So you can say all you want, hey kids, stay calm, be relaxed, but if you're anxious and nervous, they're going to be anxious and nervous. So our kids learn by example and by action. They don't learn from what we tell them. So we can give all the advice that we want. And we, as dads, we love that. We're advice guys, right? Oh, let me give you some advice here. That's the best feeling, right? They're not going to listen to us. But what they will see is if I tell my son, you need to eat healthy, and then I go and drink a soda and chug a beer and eat a Heath bar for dinner, he's going to see that. And he's going to realize over time, kids are smart. He's going to say, wow, dad's kind of a hypocrite. He tells me to eat vegetables, but he's eating candy. I'm going to eat candy too. I don't need to eat healthy. So
yeah,
that's
as I say, not as I do does not work. Kids are mimickers.
Yes, we could get away with it maybe on a podcast. You don't know what I have behind me, so I can say all these great things. I might be able to get away with it for a while, but our kids are with us every day and they see our behavior. And it's the most important thing we can do is model that good behavior. So if you want your kids to be healthy, you have to be healthy yourself. I don't know a single dad who doesn't have good, eating habits that his son or his daughter doesn't have those same issues. It runs in families for sure.
I couldn't agree more. Whenever you see overweight kids, the parents are usually overweight too. Like
Almost
it's
always.
just
Yep.
almost
And
always.
it's not genetic. We're being sold this lie that obesity is genetic and that, it's just I mean, and there are people who have a predisposition. I did my 23andMe genetic test a couple of years ago. My family is very highly predisposed to type 2 diabetes.
Hmm.
None of us are overweight, and I don't have a single diabetic family member.
There's
And
a
that's just
few
my
there's
one
a few
example, but
tests
it's
that this guy Gary Brackett talks about. There are genetic mutation tests in that podcast with Joe Rogan, and I'm actually looking forward to do them myself and with my kids because those genetic mutations he talks about, those are the ones that matter because certain genes we have and certain genes will lack, and those tests will show you which ones you lack and how to account for that in your nutrition, right? Because sometimes you don't break down certain foods. And that's like, for instance, when we spray with folic acid, which is everything is sprayed with folic acid today in our nutrition. But he talks about how 44% of humanity, so everybody, so 44% of people don't break down folic acid. And that causes, yeah, and that
I didn't
causes,
know that. I thought everyone could break down folic acid.
now he talks about something he called mullion,
Oh,
forgot the terminology. So that's why I didn't want to butcher
super
the
interesting.
podcast. Please listen
Yeah,
to it. Yeah.
yeah.
He talks about this gene that we have. It's called, basically stands for MFRM. They call it the motherfucker gene. You know,
Nice.
yeah, yeah, gene mutation. And 44% of people lack that gene mutation. And therefore, 44% of people cannot break down folic acid. And
Mm.
everything is sprayed with folic acid. And that's what leads to a lot of the disruptions today, including ADHD, right? That's why he
Mm.
highly recommends for everyone to do these 5 genetic mutation tests with their kids. And that will tell you the analysis what foods they should be eating and they should not be eating.
I love that. Because I firmly believe that there is no perfect diet. I think if you look at Inuit Eskimos in Alaska, their livers are 3 times the size of yours and mine. They eat nothing but whale blubber and they're very healthy. If you and I ate their diet, we'd have had a heart attack years ago, right?
Wow.
So what's good for one person is not good for another. So, oh, you have to be vegan. Some people maybe. Oh, you have to eat only meat. Some people maybe. I really think you do have to either test yourself. As a child, I had severe allergies to wheat. And so I constantly had stomach pain. I had acne. I had all these weird issues going on. And when I switched to buckwheat and other non-gluten options, I did really well. And I'm starting to see the same thing in my son. He likes cereal. He likes these wheat products, and it affects his behavior. It makes him really congested. And I need to get that tested and see what's going on there because I'm pretty sure he has the same issue I have with a gluten intolerance. So
Yeah, we
everyone's a
eliminated
little bit
all
different.
that. We eliminated all that. Buckwheat is what my kid is from all the grains. Buckwheat is the choice in our family.
Oh, great
We've
to hear. Okay, good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've eliminated most of the weeds at all because not only folic acid but just weeds in general. We did a microbiome test on him
Mhm.
with a company called forgot the company name, but it doesn't matter. But I think these genetic mutation tests are way more important than the one we did with the microbiome testing. The company is called
Interesting.
Viam. Yeah, that
I've heard of
podcast.
them. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that podcast with Gary Breck and Joe Rogan, it was so interesting that at the end of it, Rogan is like, all right, I'm going to do all this and we're going to re-record a second episode in a few months with the results. So I can't wait for that one.
Yeah.
That's how mind-blowing this podcast was. And you know who Dana White is, right? The UFC guy.
Yep. Hmm.
So Dana White swears by Gary Breck. He calls him, this is my guy who saved me. He goes, after him, I'm not going to any doctors anymore because they don't know anything. This guy knows. If you listen to Gary Breck with Dana White episode, I mean, it's just, this is the revolution. I'm so excited for it right now because the revolution of education on nutrition is finally here. For so many years, we've been led to believe this or this or this or this. I've tried everything. I was vegan once for 6 months. I was vegetarian for 3 years. Now I'm almost carnivore. You know, all
Yeah.
these things
Yeah.
keep changing
And
in real time.
it changes for our kids. I think what's healthy for my son will not be healthy for him in 20 years. So I think our diet has to change as we age as well. So for example, I think it'd be crazy to raise a small child vegan because they need those animal proteins when they're young. But then when you're 60, I think a lot of people can be very healthy when they're vegan, right? But during those developmental phases, when you're growing, you're going through puberty, all that, what you need is very different. I was eating 5,000 calories a day when I was 14. You know, if I ate that today, I'd be 500 pounds. So we do have to adapt as we get older, and we can't necessarily eat exactly what our kids eat. We can eat the same maybe kinds of foods, but their nutritional needs are different. And it depends on the day. You know, some days my son will eat everything in sight, and other days he eats very little. And a lot of that is self-regulation. When he's growing, he's going to eat more than when he's not growing. So
That's
it's
so interesting you say that. I actually like that. Adjust with age. And self-regulation, I think emotional regulation is probably arguably one of the most important things we can teach our kids. You know, that's why I like martial arts so much for children personally. I think that they teach that. You know, meditation is one thing. You know, meditation, I discovered meditation. My wife is a yogi. She meditates. I never did before. And then I was listening to Ray Dalio. His book, Principles, is right there. It's one of the top books I've ever read in my life. And so he wrote this book in 2017. He's doing his book tour, right? Promoting it. And he's doing this podcast with a guy named Bob Roth. His nickname is Meditation Bob. And Bob asks him, what is the key to your success? And I was expecting like a kind of like financial thing, you know, like this is what it is. Because also in Tony Robbins' book, he interviewed Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio has this all-weather investment formula that the way they diversify their portfolio, it's called all-weather. So basically in any given scenario, the way they're hedged, it's a phenomenal formula. So I was expecting something like that. And his answer blew my mind. His answer, he says, the number one reason for my success is transcendental meditation.
Hmm.
And I was like, what? What is even that? I even asked my wife, babe, what the hell is transcendental meditation? She's like, I don't know. So I had to look into it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's this type of meditation where they give you a mantra and you repeat the mantra in your head for 20 minutes at a time. So I do it now every day. It made me a lot more composed. It made me a lot clearer thinker. It definitely gave me a lot of emotional regulation, which when you're raising kids, especially when you're homeschooling, unschooling, oh, it comes in handy because they'll test you. Yeah, they'll test you. They'll drive you up the wall sometimes.
Yeah.
And so teaching kids how to meditate, we bought him this device that he wears that kind of gamifies it for him. Because it was hard for me to get him to meditate. You're like, I don't know what this hell. So we bought him this device. It's called Muse. And Muse kind of makes you listen to bird chirping. So it gamifies meditation for children, you know. And the first version we bought, the band was too big for his forehead. So he had to kind of grow into it to be able to use it. But now he's using it, he's meditating, and he became a better hockey player for that because he's much more in hockey, especially in the last 2-3 minutes when you're down a goal and you get like kids usually they lose control. They get so emotional, they start fouling, and it just makes it even worse instead of being able to come back. So coach now puts him out in the end because he doesn't lose his composure at the end. He doesn't do stupid mistakes. And I think that has a lot to do with him meditating. I honestly do.
That's huge. And so for me, my struggle with meditation is try not to think about pink elephants, right? That's all you're going to think about is pink elephants. So I've found a lot of success with a kind of meditation where I allow my brain to freely float and I have ideas and I don't attach any emotion to them. And then I allow the next idea to jump in. And so that's been really successful for me. And especially if I'm moving a little bit. So I'll incorporate a little bit of yoga instead of just sitting quietly. I'll move through some poses. I'll have a little bit of light physical activity to go along with my thoughts jumping from place to place. I think for me, I get as much out of that kind of meditation as someone like yourself is able to, who's able to sit quietly and just focus on that one mantra. So there's a lot of different ways to meditate. For my son personally, I use fear is the mind killer as our mantra together. And I think he's really taken to that pretty well. He said, oh, fear is the mind killer. And we'll use that over and over slowly. From Dune, of course, is where the line is from. And I think when any 4-year-old is going to have a lot of fear, right, about new things. I don't want to try that. I'm afraid. I hear that over and over. And so I liked the idea of his mantra being opposed to fear. And I want him to be brave and I want him to be a lion. And so I think if he uses a mantra of fear is the mind killer, I think that may work really well for him. And he's taken to it quite nicely. So that's worked
awesome.
really well for him.
What are your thoughts on like sports for him? So you're an athlete. Your wife used to be an athlete, right? So what do you think of athletics for him? What kind of avenue do you foresee for him to go down?
All right. So another thing that I've crowdsourced the wisdom of all these dads we've interviewed. Don't be the dad that says, I was a great tennis player, so my son is going to be a great tennis player. That'll never work. One of my favorite movies is Dead Poet Society with Robin Williams, where the father is a doctor and his son is a brilliant poet, but he has no interest in medicine. And so the father just hates his son. He's so angry. And the son ends up killing himself in the end. And there's this, if you haven't seen the movie, it'll
No.
bring some tissues because it is devastating.
Okay.
But it's called Dead Poet Society. And the whole lesson is your children are not you, right? They have our genetics, but they're not just little Dustins running around. They are their own people. And so I've noticed my son doesn't love organized sports yet. I see a lot of his little friends who are 4 that love baseball. We've exposed him to a lot of different things, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's not huge into organized sports. And that makes me a little bit sad because I played tennis competitively growing up. I love sports. It's really important to me. But if it's not quite as key for him, that's okay. I actually like the idea of my son having some different interests than me, because if he's just a little clone of me, I won't learn anything, right? I can teach him about tennis. I can teach him about the things that I enjoyed, but I'm not going to learn from him. And he's a very different person than me, which is so much fun. He has all these little personality quirks that feel like a combination of my wife and I, and they're not just, he's not a clone of me at all. And so if he does find it a competitive, organized sport that he loves, I will support that like crazy. I'll go to all of his games and I'll be really excited about it. But if he doesn't, if he loves building, he seems like an engineer. That seems more his thing. And he's active, but he doesn't seem to love organized sports. And of course that can change as kids get older. But if that is the case and he doesn't center his life around sports like I did, I'm totally okay with that. I'll go with him and I'll learn how to build stuff with him. I'll learn, I use Midjourney with him. So he dictates into my phone what he wants to build, and then Midjourney creates the image for him. And he loves that. That is the coolest thing for him. So we create these images together, and that's kind of our new form of art we do together. And if we learn that together and we do that instead of the things I did as a kid, again, totally okay with that. I'm ready to roll with the punches and go in his direction. So
Man, I love the fact that you're introducing him to AI from such an early age. That's so empowering for him. And as far as what you said, it's so true. I was interviewing a guy named George Bryant, who said this phrase. He was in the military for many years. He's a phenomenal entrepreneur. And he said, my job as a father is not to create a mini me, is to empower my son to find his own path. And that just struck a chord with me, because I actually grew up playing basketball, and I love NFL. I love football. I look at football as like a gladiators playing chess, because it's really like a chess game between defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, head coach, and the quarterback, and they're using human bodies as pieces, to find a mismatch.
And
so
the most physically gifted human bodies in existence. I mean, I think the NFL is on. Who's your team, by the way?
Giants. Yeah,
the Giants. Oh,
helmet
sorry,
right there.
Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah, nice.
We've been terrible for years. It's okay. I'm all right. Eli gave me 2 championships. I'm forever grateful to him.
There you go. Very nice. Yeah, like
that's Eli's helmet right there, signed by him. My wife's gift to me.
That's great. Okay, yeah.
So I was watching a lot, and I took my son to a few games, and I think by taking him to games, like when Kobe Bryant was doing his goodbye tour, we took my son. He was 3 years old. We took him to Madison Square Garden to watch Kobe's last game at Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
We took him to a bunch of hockey games, football games, and I think by taking him to games, he got into that. He got excited about sports, and then we started playing with him outside, and eventually we chose hockey for him, because I think it's I like football too, but I don't see a future in football. It's too physically damaging, but hockey is like the next thing to it. And also on hockey, when he tried it for the first time, I think the speed, and because you're kind of like always fast moving on skates, I think that gives him that adrenaline rush that he just hooked on now. He's addicted to hockey now.
That's great. And it's such a fun sport, so physical, and very much a chess match. Yeah, just like football. So that's he's gonna love that. That's great.
So we got him into sports by just taking him to a bunch of games and talking about it a lot and watching games and breaking games down. I would literally pause the TV and like break down the analysis of Eli's play right now. What is he doing? From he was very little age. So right now he loves watching football, which is also a problem, by the way.
It's funny though. I don't do that. I'm not very interactive with him. When we watch football, I'm so focused myself, and he doesn't like football. He doesn't find it interesting. And I think that's my fault. I think that's because I haven't taken the time like you did to break down the plays and say, well, this is interesting because the quarterback is throwing and they're on a different side. So now they have to decide, do they go for it on 4th down? Do they kick the field goal? I think if I do that with him, he'll enjoy the sport a lot more. So I'm glad we had this conversation. I'm going to try that with him the next playoff game we're watching. And his grandfather's the same way. Both of us are talking quietly to each other about the sport, but we're not including him in it. And that's not
Yeah,
ideal. I think
try
if
it.
we we'll make him a part of the game and he's going to enjoy it more. That's a really good point.
So yeah, we actually had it I drew the whole scheme and I showed him different positions, who plays what. I explained to him like how because we teach him chess from an early age. So I basically explained to him
Nice.
it's like a chess pieces, right? Everybody's got their own moves in chess. So the same thing here. This is what a tight end does. This is what a running back does. This is what a wide out does, right? And on defense also. So you're looking at it like a chessboard. And then as we're watching, I would pause it and say, look at the pieces right now. Look what this guy is doing. Look at that slant route. And this is how he looks at football now. He's looking at it like a chess piece. And whenever now he yells out, look, there's a mismatch. I see this mismatch right there. I'm like, yep, that's a mismatch right there.
And he's already able to recognize that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And it makes the game so much more fun. So many men we're 3 beers in, we're just kind of watching, we're not really absorbing what's happening. So he's already making those analyses.
My friends are now
cool.
asking, why do I not come to games with him anymore? I'm like, because I actually enjoy watching with my son a lot more than with you guys. You guys are just drinking and yelling.
He's smarter than you guys.
You guys just yelling at the TV, and with my son, it's like a chess breakdown. We're like analyzing the plays, and we're talking, and we're pausing, and sometimes I miss a little bit. That's fine. I'm interacting with my son, and that's how we got him into like all these other sports, like hockey. Also break down plays, and with hockey, he doesn't actually like watching it because it makes him agitated. He's watching; he wants to be on the ice right away because he's a hockey player. So we don't watch much hockey, which kind of I wish he did more because it would teach him a little bit. But we'll get there. He's 9.
Yeah.
He's 9. Well, what are your takes on like martial arts? All right, what do you
so
think
I got my son into Taekwondo, and we had a really funny experience. We tried it for 6 months, and he, again, same with organized sports, didn't engage very much. I went on the mat and played with him, and we did things, and it would be a half an hour twice a week. And it was this real struggle. And I struggled as a dad. I was frustrated because there were other kids in the class the same age that were interacting with the teacher more and doing what I consider to be a better job. And so I thought, oh, why? I know my son's smart. Why is he doing this? And so I think some of my frustration was coming out, and he felt that and then would shut down even more. Right. So he would run off in the corner. I would grab him, put him back where he needed to be. And then he would just kind of tuck and not be happy about it. And so I thought, okay, this was a waste of time. What was I thinking? Well, all of a sudden, now at home, he's practicing his punches. He's practicing the techniques. He's talking about everything that he learned. So he absorbed all of it. He learned so much, even though he wasn't really engaged like I thought he should be in the classes. So we took him out. We gave him about a 6-month break. We're doing T-ball and some other things now. And I think we'll get him back in about 6 months, having had those experiences and having learned so much. And so that was a real eye-opener for me that I thought, honestly, he was zoned out, not learning anything and just kind of wasting both of our times. That wasn't the case at all. He was learning and observing everything. It's just he was young. Most of the other kids were about a year older, and he was a little uncomfortable with the situation. And so there was a lot of value for both of us in that experience. It just wasn't happening at the time. So it's really tough as dads. We want to see immediate results. We want to see our children do great immediately. We want to see all these things. And when they don't, we get really frustrated. And by we, I mean me.
Same here.
I held, I held it in well, but I was fuming. When you see your son and there's 10 other kids and he's not doing as well as those kids, you can't help it. It's your kid. You get frustrated about it. But I did a pretty good job of remaining cool on the outside and making sure that he didn't feel bad about himself, because I knew he was 3 years old at the time. For me to be angry with a 3-year-old for not doing his karate correctly is that reflects on me. That doesn't reflect on him. So
one of the other challenges as a dad is when you sound like, for instance, I hope he will still play not professional, but sports as a team sports. Because I think there's a lot that team sport teaches you. So I take my son to jiu-jitsu, but at the same time, hockey, the camaraderie, the interaction, and especially in those moments where he is the reason they lose a game, because he will screw up on the ice at the end and like let him like not do his job properly, even though he tried. That frustration to deal with as a dad, knowing that your son is the one that caused the game, and then you can't really show him that. You got to be supportive. Because he will himself kind of, punish himself in his mind. But it was a learning curve for me too.
So we learned from one of the great dads, Chris Singleton, former professional baseball player. He lost his mother in a mass shooting at a church in South Carolina. So crazy story. I think it's our 10th or 12th podcast episode. Anyway, so his story that he told is when he's with his son, who also plays baseball, his son's about 10, 12 years old. They have a system where if the son puts his cap on facing forward, they're good to talk about the game. And they can say, hey, let's break down the plays. Let's see how everything went. Let's talk about it. You know, I'm emotionally, I'm okay having those conversations. But if his son turns the hat backwards, then, you know what, Dad, I don't want to talk about it. That was a horrible game. Let's just go get, you know, some ice cream and just relax and not, you know, worry about this so much. And so they have a nonverbal system they've created. So his son doesn't have to feel bad opening up to him, because one of the worst things we can do as dads is the drive home afterwards can really harm our relationship with our children, right? As dads, we want to go, oh, you know, you didn't do so great with the hockey. Let's break it down. Let's have this conversation. And it sounds like your son's pretty receptive to that, but maybe he's not sometimes. Maybe he just wants to relax and move on. And so that system where you can say, all right, if your hat's on forward, we're going to talk about it. We're all in. But if the hat's on backwards, you know what? We don't have to have this conversation right now. We can talk about it later. It really was a game changer for me. So I'm glad we had that conversation with Chris.
Dustin, this is so awesome. This is such great advice. Thank you for that. I'm going to listen to that pod, man.
Yeah,
And
Chris Singleton. Yep.
This is a great note to end on. It's been an hour. I really appreciate your time. I hope we can do it again, man. This was a lot of fun. I look forward to it.
Yeah, hopefully we can get you on our pod as well. And this has been so much fun. I'm energized. I'm ready to go. We're chatting with Robert Scoble in a couple hours on a space. I'm super excited about that. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm going to join that space. I'm going to be on it.
Jump in. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, look him up. He's a fascinating dude. 3 kids. It'd be a lot of fun. Hopefully get you up there and speak.
Looking forward to it, man. Thank you so much for your time, Dustin. Looking forward to another one.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Zach.